Now we're at almost 300 people in the room.
Excellent.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to try and share our screen here. You let me know if it's showing, Brent.
Yeah.
It's there?
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect. And we are off and running. So again, welcome everybody. You can see our title there today. This presentation is going to focus on alternative environment activities and phys ed and health education. We're going to try to shed some light on why we think that alternative environment activities are so important right now, especially considering the current things that are happening around the world and the pandemic, and also just share some of our research on this area. It's something that both Brent and I are extremely passionate about, and we've got some wonderful colleagues who have been working with us on research in this area for the last couple of years. And so we've got lots to share with you today, but before we begin, oh, my slideshow is not progressing. There we go. We just wanted to acknowledge the land on which we work, study, and live. Since this presentation is being held online, a singular land acknowledgement does not capture the richness of our distribution across the various locations in Canada. We've got almost 300 people in here today, assumedly all across the country and beyond. But me here, I'm at the University of Winnipeg, which is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Naywak, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples on Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Métis Nation.
I'm located in Edmonton, Alberta. Concordia University of Edmonton is located on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional meeting place and home of many Indigenous peoples, including Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Dakota Sioux. We respect the diverse histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities who continue to enrich this land on which we live together. So today we'd like to start by just giving a little bit more background into who we are, aside from our academic lives. Again, I live in Edmonton, Alberta. I've spent the last 20 years here, originally from Trail, British Columbia. Made my way to Edmonton, where I taught school with Edmonton Catholic Schools for 10 years and have been teaching in the post-secondary institution for the past 10 years. I have a wonderful young family, my son and daughter of 6 and 5. We love to live in nature. We love to explore on a daily basis. As you can see on the right there, there's us hanging out in trees. It's part of our daily lives, getting out there, and really I think it's important for us all to consider the impact that outdoor education, being outdoors can have on our children's lives, on our students' lives, and our own lives. And that's really important to me. It's important to our research team, and certainly it's one of the reasons why we're sharing this information with you today. Throughout this past many months, that has been a bit challenging. It's been an opportunity for me to work at home, obviously, and spend this time with my children. You know, and I think it's important for us to make sure that we can think about today, you know, what is accessible to us in our lives to be outdoors, be spending time outdoors. And that's an important idea for us. So my wife's taking the picture, and this is my family. And since Nathan shared his daughter got a little screen time, I'm going to introduce my daughter a little bit as well. She wants to join. Wanted to be on TV, so she thinks this is TV. So anyway, that's a little bit about me.
Excellent. Thanks, buddy. Yeah, so that's me on the left there with my family skiing, downhill skiing. We do that in Manitoba. It would not classify probably as downhill if you lived in Alberta, BC, or anywhere else. Well, Saskatchewan, they're kind of the same as us here, but we do have some hills, and we're originally from Ontario. My wife and I grew up in Southern Ontario, and that's where I first got into education and did my education degree at Western, or formerly University of Western Ontario. But I met Brent in Edmonton. We were both doing our doctorates at the University of Alberta. I lived in Edmonton for about 5-6 years with my family, and that's where I really got a passion for skiing. And I've been in Manitoba for the last 10 years, working at the University of Winnipeg and learning to love the prairies. And yeah, I think, you know, I echo what Brent said. It's been an interesting past few months, but spending time with the family and getting outdoors has really helped make this time easier, helped us get through it. But also we've learned a lot as a family over the last little while. And one of the things that we are going to talk about today is learning in different environments and the value of learning in different environments. And boy, I think across the world, people have been learning in new environments over the last 3 or 4 months. The other thing we wanted to do here real quick was thank our research colleagues, Dr. Dan Robinson and Dr. Joe DaCosta. These two have been instrumental in the work that we've done over the past couple of years on alternative environment activities and are on all our publications with us so far on this stuff. So great two guys. We just couldn't have too many of us talking today. Brent and I are enough to manage. So for the rest of the presentation, what we're going to do is we're going to define what we mean by AEAs, because some of you maybe are wondering exactly what we mean by that term. We're going to explain the importance of alternative environments and kind of how they fit into physical education. We're going to then talk about some of the lesser known AEAs that exist out there, share some of our research that we've done on AEAs over the past couple of years, discuss some strategies for including them into your phys ed program, some examples, so there'll be some practical components at the end. And of course, we're gonna have some time for some question and answer. So what do we mean by alternative environment activities? It's an interesting term, and not every province in Canada uses this specific term, but we don't mean outdoor education. That's one thing I wanna state here today, is that's not what we mean. And the definition that we go by is that it's physical activities that are not restricted in scope to the traditional uses of a gymnasium, sports field, or running tracks. And you can see some of those classic examples here. And it's not that you can't do some alternative activities in these spaces. The idea of alternative environment activities is really about exploring physical activity in different types of environments and getting used to different types of environments. And we're going to talk specifically about what we kind of see those environments as a little later on in the presentation today. But for the purpose of today, think of it as things outside of those spaces, okay? Things that you're trying to do that aren't, you know, the traditional uses of those spaces. You're trying to do something different and explore new types of places. And we wanted to start off with a quick survey today. And so we're going to see how this goes. It's the PHE Canada is helping us out with this. And so our first question that we're going to ask you, and this should pop up in a second, is how many people who are attending right now, listening in, we've got over 300 of you, live within a 10-minute walk of a park? So Faye, you want to share that one?
Yeah, so we've just launched the poll, and we'll maybe give it like 20 seconds because we have 5 more questions like this coming up soon. So I'll just everyone to vote. Okay, so right now we have 74% of attendees have voted. We'll give it another 10 seconds or so.
Sure.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So I will close the poll and share the result right away. It looks like 90% of attendees said yes.
So 90%?
Right. And then, yes, 90% said yes, they live within a 10-minute walk of a park. And the next question, I'll launch it right away.
Yeah, so you know, how many of you have visited that park in the past year? Right, so lots of you live close to a park, but how many of you have actually gone to it?
Okay, so we'll wait for another 10 seconds for this question. Right now, 72% of you have voted.
Okay, what do we got?
I'll close the poll and share the results. So 89% of you said yes, you've visited the park in the past year. Not bad.
No, that's great, actually.
And next question,
So for this one, we're looking to think about the community things that are close to you. So do you have a community center, an indoor or outdoor community pool, an indoor or outdoor skating rink, anything like that that you live in within about a 10-minute walk of?
Okay, so 72%, 77%, another 10 seconds.
Yeah, as soon as we're over 80%, we're doing pretty well.
Okay. I will now close the poll and let me share the result. So we have 63% said yes, 37 said no.
Okay.
Okay, and next question, let's go.
And again, what we're looking at is, so those of you who do live that close, have you visited in the past year? And those of you who don't, you don't have to answer this question. But for those of you who do live that close, which is, you know, about 2/3 of our sample today, do you actually visit those locations that are close to you? Are you using them?
Okay. Another 5 seconds or so.
Yeah.
And share results.
69.
Yeah, so just know this, Nathan, so those are the people who actually voted yes. So we have 64% people voted for this question because this
64?
question doesn't apply to everyone. Yes, 60% of people voted, and then out of the 64%, 69 said they've visited one.
Okay, so we're visiting the parks a little bit more than we actually visit those community facilities that are close by. And our last question has to do with bike paths and hiking trails in your neighborhood. Interesting, eh, Brent?
Yes, it is. We'll be able to share some of our research findings in a bit here as well.
Awesome.
So I would say I would have expected this. Yeah, you can share the next one.
Yeah, this question applies to everyone, so please cast your votes. We'll close it in 10 seconds. Okay, right now 78% have voted.
That's good.
Okay, I'll close the poll and share the result. So 87% said yes.
Woo,
they live close to bike paths or hiking trails. And next question.
Yeah, this is our last one, folks. So how many of you actually use those trails or those paths? A lot of us, again, live close to them.
Okay, we'll wait for another 10 seconds.
Sure.
We appreciate you taking part.
We're gonna tie this all together, right, Brent?
We are. We appreciate the input, everyone.
Yeah, we just wanted to get you engaged in thinking about these things a little bit.
Okay, now I'll share the results. So 89% of you said you have used them in the past year.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay, and now I'll hand it back to Nathan and Brent.
Okay, thank you very much. Nathan, I wonder how many, when we look at this poll, I wonder how it's been changed for some of the individuals in terms of the last few months. You know, has this COVID-19 pandemic given that provided people with ideas on how they can be using these spaces? So, you know, we asked the question in the past year. I wonder if it would have been different if we said in the past 3 months or beyond that.
Or before the past 3 months, right?
Absolutely. So it's interesting.
Nathan and Brent. So Norma is actually asking the same question. So she's asking, are these results because of COVID?
Thank you.
Because that actually pushes people outside. So yeah. Do you want me to
question, Norma, and I think it's something we need to think about. And I'm certain that everyone here who's listening today has those same questions. I mean, when I think about thinking about some of the ideas that around my environment, certainly I've explored much more with during this time. Almost disheartening that I haven't before, right? And we have these places available to us, and sometimes it takes times like this, so challenging times, if you will. But interesting, Norma, question. I appreciate it, and I think that's something that we could further expand upon in some of our research. Certainly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Brent, you can relate it back now on this slide here to some of the things that we know.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. So everyone, according to the Canadian Fitness and Lifestyle Research Institute, there are a couple of notes we'd like to share with you at this point. So it's important to note that well over half of all Canadians have access and live in close proximity to parks and or other public recreational facilities, from baseball diamonds to hockey rinks to curling rinks. All these types of facilities that are available to us are within our close proximity of where we are situated, which offers an abundance of physical activity opportunities, from anywhere from running tracks to skating to curling rinks to outdoor facilities. These are available to us, and I encourage you, following this discussion today, to further explore these places when you're driving around your own locations, and pinpointing where these places are and how close they truly are for us to access. However, that said, less than half of Canadian children and youth use these community amenities that are easily available. Now, I would suggest that there are several reasons that exist for this statistic. When we were doing some of the research and some of the reading and delving into the literature, you know, comfort is one reason. A lack of comfort, the ability to feel, or that self-efficacy to utilize these places is sad. Because if children aren't having the opportunities, which could be in the PHE programs, to explore and develop their skills in these areas, using these facilities through alternative environment activities, really, I think it's an excellent avenue. We all know this. This is an important place for us in our teaching, to expose our students to these places so they can develop their comfort, they can develop their knowledge, and they can obviously gain experience in those areas.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Brent, when you look at our numbers today, you know, we had like 89–90% of our group are in close proximity and have said that they've been to these facilities. And this is going back to 2011, but it just goes to show, you know, maybe right now people are using them more, and that's why. But the idea that our youth have not been using these amenities typically in the past is definitely one of the reasons why we're so interested in AEAs.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to consider who our students are, because, you know, a portion of our students, to some people who I'm speaking to right now, have tremendous amount of opportunities to use certain facilities, and others are teaching students who have very minimal opportunities. And it's really our job as teachers, I believe, to expose our students as much as possible to these places that we really hope that they will use into their adult years. So my question that I'd like to raise at this point is, why is physical activity in alternative environments so important in our daily lives? And as you can see from our two wonderful photos here of exploration, I mean, we want to develop the comfort. We understand that in our daily lives, it's a common part to be in these alternative environments, in these outdoor areas, in these places where we can be physically active. It's easily accessible. I mean, where can we find a tree to develop some skills, right?
Yeah.
You know, you take a look at just opportunities around your own neighborhood. Go explore today and see these areas with where we have access. There are several benefits, health benefits to being outdoors, as we know. I'm sure everyone here is aware of all the literature around that. That said, one such benefit is becoming comfortable, and I really think it's impactful for us to think about how we can develop our students' self-efficacy around these areas. The belief that they can move move in a way where they can develop their fundamental movement skills. Really important opportunities, anywhere from strength to certain types of mobility. These are all great opportunities for us to provide. And of course, we're not just talking about climbing trees here. We're talking about places outside of the gymnasium, providing children with opportunities to certainly develop their skills and add breadth and variety to our physical education programming. So it's educational beyond physical and health education. I just wanted to state that being physically active in alternate environments obviously helps develop a deeper understanding of our surroundings as well.
Yeah, great point.
So I would like to just finish this off by saying, I'm sure it's clear with everyone listening that overall it's important and imperative that we understand that activity in alternate environments in general is beneficial, and we must find ways to incorporate them in our school programs. And we feel fortunate today to have the opportunity to share some research, some very recent research that we've conducted around teacher embracement, which we'll talk about in the near future here. So now, what about alternate environments in our physical education program, PHE programs? Yeah, it's been noted, and I certainly would think that people could agree here that there's been an overemphasis of sport at the expense of other sorts of movement domains in our PE programs. I'd like to hear maybe some thoughts around that. Certainly, we're going to invite you to take a look at some of the literature that we've certainly looked into, and you can take a look at the end of the slide presentation at some of the literature where we're kind of situating our presentation around. But when it comes to curriculum, we find that there's recommendations for these. There are recommendations and there are requirements for alternate environments in our program, which means that we should be teaching these, and it does add breadth and variety to our programming. It adds variety by giving opportunities of what maybe students aren't normally provided with. So from a curricular perspective, it's important for us to think about where AEAs fit in our programming and what are some of those barriers, which we'll talk about in a bit here. But what are some of those barriers I wanted to ask to teachers that are keeping us from incorporating or teaching AEAs in our programs? So that's going to be interesting to share, and I look forward to any of your input as well.
Yeah, and I mean, that last point there is one of the real interesting things in Canada right now. Every provincial curricular document has some form of mention of AEAs. Now, they don't all use that term. In some provinces, they use the term alternative pursuits or something along those lines. But this idea of getting students into alternative environments and introducing them to activities that are maybe non-traditional in a sense is there across curriculum in this entire country, even though every province has its own curriculum.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's not just the curricular documents or academics in PHE that are encouraging getting kids into these spaces, but even those who are doing research in the area of just kids' physical activity in general. So this is the 2015 participation report card on physical activity for children and youth, and this was the title page that year. And you can see the title there, the biggest risk is keeping kids indoors. And yes, alternative environments, some of them could be indoors, but the large majority are outdoor activities. And so, when we think about this document that was released, and most of you have probably come across the Canadian participation report card before, and here's some of the things that they said that year, or some findings that they had. Students take 35% more steps in a phys ed class simply when it's held outdoors. So if you do basketball indoors versus basketball outdoors, they're going to take 35% more steps in that phys ed class just because they're outside. And again, physical activity isn't everything in phys ed, but it's part of it. We would like to get them moving, but we've already talked about some of the other benefits to getting them outside as well. You see there, Canadian kids age 9 to 17 who play outside after school, they're getting more physical activity a day. So, it's not just this phys ed thing, but there's this physical activity benefit. There's these benefits around just being outside, spending time outdoors. And these days, obviously, getting outdoors is maybe more important than ever for our mental health. So lots of other ways of looking at it, not just from the phys ed academics and phys ed research point of view. Some of the other reasons to include alternative environment activities then that I was talking about there. One for phys ed teachers is that facilities and spaces exist, but students need to be introduced to them. So we talked about this at the beginning, that there are, there's community rinks, there's practice fields, there's playgrounds and parks, but kids need to understand that, yes, this is a space where we could be active, where we're comfortable to be active. Just because the space is there does not guarantee that the children will go and use it. And I think that's something, I don't know about you, Brent, but when I was growing up, when I went to the park or something, I was watching the older kids and what they did, and I mimicked them. But my parents took me to the park. I didn't just go there to begin with. They took me there, and they brought a Frisbee along or a ball along, or, they introduced me to games, or my older siblings introduced me to games like hide and seek.
Absolutely.
Right.
What I find interesting is, I take my son skating, and I love coaching hockey. I love teaching skating. Let me tell you, my son learned to skate way more effectively by watching older kids on the skating rink, emulating those students, copying what those older students on the ice rink, whether it was public skating or whatever it is, following them, than listening to some direction or whatever it would be. But just wanting to keep up the pace, catch up. And I find that fascinating, because I think that you're right, Nathan. That's the opportunity we want to provide. We want to set the table for these students, for our students, to provide them opportunities to engage in the environment. And
yeah, and I think it's, a lot of it, Brent, is about encouraging them to just explore these spaces and see what you can do in them, right? So we have to introduce the kids or our students to these spaces, and then show them that, a lake or a river, well, there's opportunities to be active and have fun there. It's, swimming, kayaking, canoeing, stand-up paddleboarding. And same thing with, a frozen pond. There's opportunities, and it doesn't just have to be skating. You can do lots of things on ice, right? And so, but they need to get comfortable. If they're not comfortable in those spaces, we don't introduce them, they're not knowledgeable about what those spaces offer, then they're not actually going to see them or jump to use them. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we need them in our phys ed programs, is we can introduce them and show students, hey, this space is a place where you can be active and have fun and lots of benefits. Now, another reason for phys ed teachers, and this is the big one, is a lack of available gymnasium or field space. And forget about COVID-19. Before that, even, the number of previous student teachers that I've taught at the University of Winnipeg who have come back to me and said, boy, I'm at a school and I never have access to the gym, or we've got 100 kids in our gym at once. And I said, well, is anybody using the outside space? I go, oh, no, it's cold out a lot of the year in Winnipeg. I go, I know, I live here too, but can we use those spaces? Yes, and we have some teachers who do amazing things in those outdoor spaces year round in Canada, whether they're living in the Yukon, Winnipeg, Edmonton. I'm hitting all the real hot spots here, but Vancouver, right? Even though it rains, you can go outside. There is always opportunity, and I think sometimes phys ed teachers are too tied to, well, I can't get gym space, or I can't get, there's other spaces that we can use, right? And so I think that's, again, where alternative environments are really, really valuable. And then, yes, now with the COVID-19 situation, the benefits to AEAs, physical distancing requirements, well, a lot of alternative environment activities actually suit this very, very well. We can maintain physical distance doing some of these activities. And this brings me to thinking about what PHE Canada just released, this fantastic guide to return to school for physical activity, or physical education, excuse me. And I was reading through this the other day, and I was like, man, I got to throw a slide in here about this because it's so good. For those of you who have not seen this yet, I think I can share my screen. So here's the document that PHE Canada released, I think it's about 2 weeks ago, May 26th. And this is a fantastic resource, but right in here, they're talking about things like alternative environments. And I'm just going to scroll down real quick. Where did it go? Here we go. Look at that. So there's an alternative environment. There's some snowshoeing. And right in here, they're using those kinds of terms. They're talking about getting students into alternative environments and using the space that we have. So I think there's use outdoor spaces. You see it right here, as much as possible. Modify layouts, grass, sidewalks, all of these things. There's tons of suggestions right in this document with regards to this, and I just think that it's so valuable to consider. I got to close this again. There we go. Close tab. Back over to. There we go. You see my presentation again, Brent?
Yes.
Good?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, if we think about AEAs with returning to school and trying to maintain physical distancing, a lot of the activities are individual in nature. So you saw a picture there of snowshoeing. That's something that we can maintain physical distance in. If we think about something like hiking, if we think about something like kayaking, there's lots of those. But even the things that we could do closer to home or closer to our school, so orienteering, we can do that as an individual or at least in small partners. There are lots of activities where we can, it's just easier. And also the other thing that we know about COVID-19 is that it does not transmit as well when we're outside. So doing activities outside, non-confined spaces are important, right? Equipment, one of the problems that I think people think about when they think about, COVID-19 and phys ed is, well, students are sharing equipment. They're all touching the same basketball or passing it around, or dodgeballs, or any of those activities, football. If we're sharing equipment all the time and they're all touching the same equipment, there's concerns there. But a lot of the alternative environment activities, you have your own equipment and you just use your own equipment. You don't have to share. Now, obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about the barriers and things like cost further on in this presentation. But when we're thinking just on this level, if we're trying to find things that, don't actually require us to share equipment, alternative environment activities, there's a lot of them that allow us to avoid that. And then, yeah, student learning and mental health, just being outdoors, there's benefits to that. So, what we're going to do next here is we're just going to provide some specific examples of alternative environment activities for you. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that we're talking about. So Brent, you want to share some of the common ones here first, I guess?
Absolutely. Okay, so basically we understand that there are people from different locations across Canada and beyond here. So, we're speaking to some traditional areas where Nathan and I have definitely been spending our teaching years. But these are some of the more well-known, of course, AEAs, from ice hockey, skating, to golf, snowshoeing. And I'm certain that the majority of people who would be considering coming to a session like this today would have been teaching these types of activities. I'm sure that swimming is a very common one. I think it's an essential skill that we need to be teaching our children. Of course, skating and camping, for some of you who've spent some time. I am going to speak to safety down the road here. But I know that some of you are probably thinking, as Nathan and I are speaking, that safety, we got to think about safety. And yeah, we do agree. When Nathan's talking about ice, we're talking about being on ice, outside on lakes, frozen lake maybe or something. We have to teach these things, and they're very, very important. But providing opportunities and exposure for that. Now,
here's some lesser known ones.
Yeah, on the other side, there are some lesser known ones, and I think it's important for us to consider some of these. I know that in my teaching of elementary and junior high school years, I remember really having opportunities to bring in an archery program, which I felt that the students really benefited from, giving them exposure to archery type activities. Orienteering is something we're going to talk about, and something that Nathan and I do a lot of work around, orienteering and string orienteering ideas. But here's some other ones. I mean, we know that in Alberta, even horseback riding is one of the ones that's maybe outlined in our program of studies. These are ones that certainly may be a little bit more beyond expertise, but they are certainly ones that we have seen, and we know that teachers can teach, depending on the location, of course. When you're thinking
of surfing in Alberta, there, Brett?
Windsurfing, perhaps, snorkeling, scuba. I certainly know that I spoke to, and I invited a teacher from British Columbia, from the island, to join us today, and I'm hoping she's here. But this particular teacher is out there in the water on the island. Can you imagine the skills we can be helping our students develop around water if we have access to it? So there's lots of great opportunities here to think about these types of things, and certainly an opportunity for you to explore how you employ some of these maybe less commonly known activities in your school programs.
Yeah,
So,
and that leads us to this question, right, Brent?
It does. So I'd like to ask you, if we could think about this here. We'd like to ask you to take a couple of seconds here to answer. Throughout the school year, do you include alternative environment activities as part of your PHE program? What do you think the best response could be related to your experience?
Okay, so Nathan and Brent, since we're waiting for people to contribute to the poll, we are receiving a lot of good comments and questions. So maybe we can, go through like maybe 1 or 2 questions since we're waiting. So it's quite relevant to the activities that was being proposed in the previous slides. So Marcel was asking, please talk about possible outdoor activities for raining days or cold days. And also another relevant comments from Stacy. So she says, Brent and Nathan love the idea of the activities presented, but I'm going to say they're very, you can call them like privileged activities. What else do we have for the typical inner city school campus with no or little access to nature? So absolutely. I believe those are good questions. Maybe even a little bit hard questions, but yeah.
I'll take that first one there, Marcel.
Well, just for the sake of time, we've got those 2 questions. Maybe can we close up the first survey, because we've got one other question right after that, and Brent and I will answer those questions while the next question's up.
For sure. So now we have 72% voted.
Okay.
And I'll close the poll in 5 seconds.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for those questions.
Close poll, and I'll share results. Okay, so it looks like the majority of you voted for rarely, yes, 50%. Yeah.
So it is interesting, and we'll take a look at the second one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting, and we're going to talk about our research and how this relates to it. But Brent, do you want to take a stab at that first question about the rainy day activities and stuff?
Yeah, I think anytime we think about rainy days, getting children outside, I mean, obviously, I'm thinking about activities where we're going to need to think about that clothing when you're talking about cold weather. Being in Edmonton, I mean, think about 2 years ago, it was quite cold, and there were days when students were stuck inside. But getting outside it's really important, I think, to consider the fact that the warm clothing or the layering is important, the safety around that. But in terms of rainy days and staying close to maybe the fields or staying close to your school community, I always come back to things like orienteering. Orienteering is a tremendous opportunity for students to get outside, and they can do it on the playground. We've done lots of activities with schools where orienteering courses have been developed around the school environment. And of course, yeah, with rain, I mean, of course, you're just going to need to be able to be warm, have whatever the clothing would need to take place there. But for me, that's one. Thinking about staying closer to the school community, but still providing opportunities to be in that alternative environment. And again, orienteering always seems to stick out to me.
Yeah, Nathan? I would say, I work at an inner city university, and we've got inner city schools all around us here in Winnipeg. And yeah, lots of them don't have a ton of space, but you can still do things like urban hiking. There is nothing wrong with walking with your students through a neighborhood. You can still learn a lot. You can talk about it. And even things like urban polling have grown with older age groups. But I think urban hiking's an option. I think using your own playground, but modifying it to some of these activities. So things like alternative environment, if we're looking at things like, you could do snowshoeing. And again, yes, some of these have an expense with them. Orienteering, as Brent mentioned, does not have much of an expense. But even things like sledding and tobogganing, shelter building, which is more of an outdoor ed thing, but building snow forts, they're still physically active, and you can still relate that to curricular goals. There's still movement involved, strength involved, coordination, right? There's knowledge and understanding. we've got all sorts of physical education curricular goals that are hit by simply building the fort and playing in the snow. And so I think those are all really good options. Just for sake of time, do we want to see what our responses to the second question? So we'd asked about provincial curricular requirements. Let's see how many people believe that they're required to include these across the country.
Okay, so I just launched the pool, Nathan. Sorry about that. So we'll give it 20 seconds for people to vote.
So okay. I just want to say to everybody that you do have access to our information. If you have questions beyond that we can respond to today, don't hesitate to contact us. We would love to strike up a conversation and talk more about this. So you know, the questions that have been raised, we do want to attend to them. But if you'd like some expansion on the answers, certainly please email us. Do not hesitate, because this is important for us to be able to get to share the ideas and to hear from you as to, you know, some of these concerns in the schools. We're going to turn it over in a little bit here to some of our research, which we'd like to share with you to discuss some of these items we've been talking about.
Perfect. So I'll close the poll right now. So 65% of the attendees have voted. And here is the results. So 64% of those people who voted said yes, they believe so.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, well, if we can share my screen again, then we're going to talk a little bit about that and how that relates to some of our research here. So Brent, you want to talk a little bit, introduce them to our research and what we've done recently on AEAs?
All right, so what we'd like to talk about today is a little bit about our first study that Nathan and I took a little bit of a, you know, we started to develop a few years ago together when we were graduate students, and we furthered this obviously with our research team as Dr. Robinson and Dr. DaCosta have joined us. The idea behind the study is to investigate teacher embracement of AEAs in Canadian context. So we employed a descriptive study using an online survey that we developed. Our purpose was to gain an understanding of how teachers in Canada embrace the ideas of AEAs in their programming. So we decided to conduct our study in Alberta and Manitoba, and for two different reasons. One being, obviously, that's where the both of us are located, which is always plays a part of it sometimes. But secondly, because in Alberta and Manitoba, there are curricular requirements to teach what we refer to as AEAs. So we had a sample of 225 teachers from Alberta and Manitoba, and we want to thank obviously our physical education councils in our province who were able to send that out as a survey. So shout out to the two provincial councils in this area. So as you can take a look here at this pie chart, we'd like to just share a couple of descriptive type statistics, and we'd like you to invite you at the end here to search for our article and take a look more deeply at some of our findings. But what we thought we'd share today is this. Our results show that 36% of our teachers rarely included AEAs participant-wise. Of additional interest was that 25% of all of the participants we surveyed were unaware of curricular requirements to include alternative environments. And remember, both Manitoba and Alberta curricula indicate teachers are required to teach these types of activities. So we found that to be interesting and worthy of sharing today. When we
think back to our survey that we just did, Brent, you know, we look at how many people in here said that they required it. It is an interesting question, and I wonder how many people really had to think about that.
Absolutely. As we move on here to our next slide, we're thinking about perceived difficulty of including AEAs. So when you're looking at it, at your, as a teacher, perceived difficulty of teaching this in your programming, it was found that over 60% of participants indicated that teaching AEAs are at least moderately difficult to include. That raises a question for us is, well, what is it that makes it difficult? And I think that's something that's worthy of exploring further. There are teachers on this call today who probably are asking themselves, yeah, it is difficult for various reasons, and we'd like to think about this. We'd like to have our discussion go in this direction to go, you know, which of the following do you personally feel as an educator is the biggest reason stopping you from including alternative environments in your physical and health education program? We have provided you with some opportunities to fill this in, and we'd find it interesting to share this because it does kind of expand upon our research here. So,
if we could share that, Faye?
Yeah, it's being shared right now.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting, Brent, like the questions we've already heard, they're related to this.
Absolutely. And so it's on the minds of our educators.
Yeah.
And all of these are, and you might have other ones. We could only list 5 here today. There are other ones for sure out there. Just the software we're using, we could only list 5 today. But yes, if you've got other ones, you can share those too later. How are we doing, Faye?
We have 66%.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Has voted.
You know, Nathan, good point. It would be interesting if participants in this workshop had others. It'd be interesting to hear what those others would be. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, let's share our results here.
Perfect.
Awesome.
So, yeah, Brand, you can speak to the result here.
Okay, I'll speak to it, Nathan. Time is 11%. Organizational requirements, 23%. Cost, which includes transportation, 39%. Associated risks, 18%. And personal knowledge and experience, 8%.
Oh, that's really interesting because our research showed a little bit different a few years ago when we looked at just Alberta and Manitoba. Cost blew it out of the water a few years ago.
Yes, let's show that next slide.
Yeah, so is that up? Can you see this now? There you go.
Yours, yeah.
Yeah, so when we conducted our research a couple years ago, cost was identified as the big one. You can see that, yeah, perceived risk and time and organizational requirements. And today, cost was still the biggest one listed there, but some of the other ones were up there, you know. But it's interesting when I look at these and I think about these because I look at that and I go, well, cost is often a perception, and someone asked that question. You know, these are activities of privilege. These are, you know, expensive activities. And you're right, a bunch of alternative environment activities, there's an expense. Horseback riding, downhill skiing, those are very expensive activities to do. But things like orienteering, hiking, tobogganing, our costs there are pretty minimal, especially when you think of, you know, ordering basketballs for an entire school at $40 a basketball. Well, we can get, you know, crazy carpets for like $5 and sleds for that kind of price for tobogganing. So if you think about how much you spend on other equipment at school, maybe, you know, the costs related to alternative environment activities are, it's a perception because people immediately think about those high ticket activities. And sure, yeah, I'd love to take all my students horseback riding and rock climbing, but it's not possible. So I've got to think of other alternative environment activities where we can reduce that cost. And I actually personally think that time might be the biggest problem that a lot of our teachers are facing. But you know what? It speaks. They think costs. So the other thing that we found when we were looking at these perceived barriers was we got some qualitative feedback. So here are some of the comments that we got from individuals with regards to cost. And I'm sure lots of you out there today are thinking these things. Yeah, it's beneficial, but it's expensive. There is a cost and the risk. Yeah, some of these activities like downhill skiing, those are considered really high risk. And I know lots of places where schools are not allowed to use that as an option. But there's also other activities, I think that, you know, the risk is very minimal and the cost is very minimal, but we associate alternative environment activities often with these high cost, high risk activities. And really, I don't think that's the case all the time. there are other options out there, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. How about this one, Brent? What do you think here? Some of the comments we got about how beneficial AEAs are in a phys ed program.
Absolutely. So what we've done here is we've laid out some slides for you you're going to have access to these, I believe, in 24 to 48 hours too. So please go back into them and take a look at some of these. But these are definitely outlined in some of our papers. And I find it fascinating when we were able to provide some opportunities for participants to share their thoughts. So aside from the quantitative data, these are some of the statements that came out. So, just to highlight maybe one of them, how beneficial do you believe they are? I think it's very important, looking at the third one, for students to experience alternative environments. Some children do not gravitate towards physical activity in general, or do not enjoy the traditional avenues of physical activity. How many times have we heard this?
Yeah.
Alternative environment opportunities, peers have new chances to bond and experience each other while also becoming more aware of their own self as they learn new activities. And I think it's important for to think about expanding our horizon outside the gymnasium, getting students to think of these activities outside of that regular gymnasium in these alternative environments. So have a look at some of those quotes that were, written verbatim from some of our participants. To follow up on the next slide here, participants thoughts about why AEAs are part of our curricula. Students need to learn how to be active away from the gym. The more options and experiences they have, the better chance they'll do activities again and on their own time. And closing off on it, one, to reach a wider range of students with a wider variety of activities. We talk about breadth and variety. Two, to encourage students to be active without having to play traditional sports. So please go back into this slide presentation and take a look at some of these and share them amongst your own colleagues. But overall, throughout our study that we're talking about here, it's clear that participants in the study feel that AEAs afford students more breadth and variety in their PHE programming. And this this definitely led to the development of our second study, which Nathan will now talk about, which we conducted in 2 other locations.
Yeah, and so, that first study really gave us this idea that, okay, phys ed teachers see them as valuable here in Canada, and that, there are some barriers, but they think it should be part of the phys ed program. And I said, well, why don't we go and see if that's the same in other places? And so we did a study where we looked at Ireland versus Nova Scotia, and we found that on both sides of the Atlantic, yeah, they have the same interest. They think that they're beneficial, that they should be involved in a phys ed program. They like the low cost ones. So the ones that they're using the most in Ireland, hiking, orienteering, things that don't cost much, small wheel activities like skateboarding, anything that was lower cost was more common. Some significant differences we found between the two places. So we looked at Nova Scotia and Ireland, and there's lots of similarities between there. In Nova Scotia, they did more snow-based activities. They don't get much snow in Ireland and ice. But teachers in Ireland were more likely to see cost as the biggest barrier. But the teachers in Ireland were also more likely to do aquatic activities, so any water-based activity, which is interesting. There's tons of water in Nova Scotia, but in Ireland, it's right in their curriculum, actually, that they're supposed to do water-based activities, and they include them. Nova Scotia, they were likely to see organization as a big barrier. They also were more likely to have done professional development related to AEAs here in Canada. And they were more likely to believe that their school leaders support alternative environment inclusion here in Canada, or in Nova Scotia at least, versus Ireland. So when we start to think about this in Canada, it sounds like AEAs are a big part of the curriculum. And so when we think about that, then it becomes a question of, well, how do we include these things, and what are some strategies to make it easier? Because there are these barriers. And so we tried to provide a few here today for you, and we're going to talk about some specific activities to finish off here. But we want to talk about some practical strategies. So search for alternative requirements that require minimal or no associated costs. So string orienteering, snow shelter building. We've talked about a couple of those already, and we've got lists of these, lots of activities. And if you've got examples today, we want this to be a sharing community. So if you know some alternative environment activities that you're doing at your school that you can share with us, we'll find a way to get that out there and share an additional handout of suggested activities. That would be wonderful, okay? Because low cost, low equipment, low transportation are things that we're looking for, right? Lots of people think you got to go a long ways to do these activities. Now, you can do these at an inner city school close by. That's fine. There's ways to do it. As I said, urban hiking is a great example. Discover ways to share related costs. This is big in Manitoba. They've done a great job, I think. PHE Manitoba has things like they have a set of GPS units that any of the schools can use to do geocaching, and they can just loan them out from PHE Manitoba. I know school divisions that have cross-country skis or snowshoes. So, sharing the cost across an entire division or a couple schools can really help out with these types of things. Also, develop relationships with external organizations. My experiences with paddling associations has been amazing. Lots of them give great deals, or they'll do it for free just to get some experience. They've got all the equipment. You've just got to find your way there. They might even come to you and bring equipment and do some dry land training first. Curling, Brent's going to talk about that in a minute, but there's lots of options there. And so there really are groups out there that are willing to help you out, and you just got to be willing to approach them. So we talked about earlier kind of the defining example of what an alternative environment is, and we said, that it's outside of the gymnasium. Well, we've tried to classify them into 4 areas, and we say, your alternative environment activities can either happen on land, water, ice, snow, and then we've got things like air, diving, and climbing walls. And even water can kind of be divided into 2 areas. But we really think that all alternative environment activities can fit in these areas, and we've got some suggestions there for teaching considerations. So yeah, you got to talk to your school administrators, get approval to do these activities. Arranging time is a tough one. If you've got to get off of your school property, arranging time is tough. Working with other classes, trying to double up on phys ed classes back to back, or a phys ed class before lunch, and that runs into lunch. Those are options for sure. Obviously, consent forms are big. You need to know skill levels, ensure volunteers. I think volunteers are really important to doing alternative environment activities. Just if you're in different spaces, having more adults makes it easier to manage things. But again, if you're going certain places, off-site instructors will help you out. The other thing is, for all AEAs, you want to be sure that the leader, if it's you or someone else in the group, is always carrying an appropriate first aid kit. And so some ideal examples for alternative environments, we're going to do a few elementary, a few kind of middle, and a few at the secondary level. And so elementary, we're thinking like K to 6, that's kind of K to 7, that's kind of how it works here in Manitoba. We don't have JK. And so one great example that I've seen is small wheel activities. This was a unit that a former student of mine developed, and I thought it was so cool. It's great for developing balance and coordination. And this is things like rollerblading, scooters, skateboarding. And the nice thing about this is that lots of the kids have them. They could bring their own, but you can collect these. They're fairly easy to get, old skateboards for very cheap. And they don't need to be high quality. They've just got to be something that the kids can try out, try balancing on, those types of things. School tarmac's great. You can do it indoors, although I don't typically recommend it because it can be tough on the floors, but I've seen even people skating through the hallways. So stations work well for these activities, having students choose which small wheels they want to do. And I think these are wonderful for lunchtime and after school programs. And again, phys ed, it's not always about doing it, during your scheduled phys ed class. And you're going to be able to access this. We've got some available resources on all of these and links at the bottom. String orienteering, Brent, was that you?
Absolutely. So just thinking about people's time here, we're going to go through some of these a little bit quicker. However, again, feel free to reach out to us and take a look at some of these at your own leisure as well. But string orienteering, what an awesome opportunity to help develop students, younger students, skills around the orienteering. I'm not sure how many of you have done string orienteering, but as you can see in the first picture there, Nathan, the string is being tied to the tree, and the string actually goes across the course, wherever the course takes you, to different control points where the students then are asked to do a certain task or perform a skill at the control point. So string orienteering is an excellent opportunity for young children to include their fitness, movement skills, develop their cross-curricular connection ideas around measurement or geography or all these types of things, and these tasks at these control points. Now, string orienteering is also around safety, because orienteering can be a little bit more of an expanded piece of area location across the location. However, string orienteering can be a course developed around your own playing field. So string, paper, maybe a compass if you want, but for the lower grades, not necessarily. But any outdoor space can be used for string orienteering. There's an available resource. The handout that we shared for this presentation that Faye will share with you will provide you with that. The next one, tobogganing. Of course, we all enjoy tobogganing in our days, and it's another opportunity if we have locations where we are in close proximity to certain hills. Provides opportunities for your locomotor skills, lots of fundamental movement skills, and of course fitness. So again, this is another opportunity, whether the students have their own and they bring, but that thinking about sleds and toboggans are required, of course. But I also believe that these are opportunities to teach children about safety in the environment, injury prevention in the environment. So tobogganing is another one that perhaps maybe you'll explore. And the last one I'll talk to you right now is hiking. As Nathan talked about, even urban hiking. So if we're downtown or in the city center, or were there ways for us to find staircases? I know that at Concordia University of Edmonton, where I'm located, there's an absolute phenomenal river valley that we're located on. And so just those areas to be able to go through those valleys, through the river valley and the staircases, and these are places where we can use that. But in schools for children, finding those places that perhaps maybe would support that hiking programming. And again, there are available resources here.
Yeah, and things like, hiking to historic landmarks within a city, the cross-curricular connections are great there. So if you're in a downtown location, I think hiking, great activity. You can go into buildings, you can do it in winter. It's great, really, really solid activity. We have this at the middle school one. It's with the elementary, hiking can be a little bit tougher. It's still, you can do it, but I really think this is a great middle school one, especially for urban hiking. Another great middle school activity is golf type activities as far as alternative environment goes. Again, you don't even have to get off your school property to do this. You can just use the fields. And we got a picture there. That's something from our friends at Gopher. They offer those kinds of sets, but just a hoop on the ground works as well. It's not expensive. And I've seen this, one of the coolest things one of my students did one day was they developed a golf type activity using medicine balls for middle year students. And so it was, a fitness and strength training thing, but at the same time, they're throwing them, and how many times do you have to throw it till you get it into the hoop type thing. And so this one, again, very affordable, very cheap. Yes, you could go to an actual, real disc golf course in your community, and those are wonderful as well. But it's not a high cost one, fairly easy to set up, and there's lots of ways you can do it, right? It doesn't have to be a frisbee. It doesn't have to be golf with a club. Just take the ideas of golf, right? And lots of options there. Snowshoeing, this is one that's close to my heart here in Winnipeg, and I think it's a wonderful activity. And again, here we have like divisional sets or maybe a set between a couple schools. And when you look at some of the costs for things like basketball equipment, as I said, or volleyball equipment, or some of the other things that you have in your school, you start to price these things out. If you're sharing among schools, the cost is no more than what you're paying, and they probably have to be replaced less. Again, storage becomes an issue, I do find, with some of this stuff, but you can get around it. And again, this is great for introducing kids to being outside in the winter. Any winter activity, and I always say there's not bad weather, there's just bad preparation and clothing. And as long as you've got the right clothing, you can go outside most of the time. Yeah, okay, we get -40 in Winnipeg, and we don't always want to do it, but or we're not allowed to. But there are options. This is another one that I really enjoy. I'm big into kayaking and canoeing. I think it's wonderful for developing coordination, balance, muscular endurance, working muscles that kids maybe have never thought they had. This is more expensive. You got to find access to the equipment. As I said, I really think that local paddling clubs is the secret here. The other great thing about this is teaching water safety, and that's something that's common in a lot of phys ed curricula that we see. So teaching safety around water, really, really valuable. Geocaching. So geocaching, for those of you who don't know, that's kind of like orienteering, but using GPS units. Yes, there's a cost to having GPS units, but even smartphones, most smartphones have GPS on them. And if you're doing a secondary school like this one's suggested for, the odds of you having enough kids who have smartphones with GPS, pretty good, okay? So again, it's not something that's going to cost a lot. You can do it in any outdoor space. And if you go online and you start to look into geocaching, there are geocaches everywhere. You don't even have to hide your own. There'll be some, I guarantee you that there are geocaches hidden within like 5-minute walk of your school. I would be shocked if you can find a school that does not have a geocache listed within 5 minutes of that school. So another great activity, relatively affordable and very easy to access. Brent, what about this one? This is cool.
Yeah, I'd like to finish off. And again, Nathan made a point here that, yeah, we have secondary, middle school, we got elementary schools located on these, the top here. But again, we know as teachers, we can provide developmentally appropriate activities across that span. So curling, what an awesome opportunity to teach students a sport that would be considered an alternative environment, especially outside the gymnasium, where it helps develop our comfort traveling and balancing on ice, introducing students to another winter environment, another winter opportunity, sport, if you will. But alternative environment could be, as you see in the pictures, developed outside. Again, I really think it's important that we all consider safety and injury prevention. It's important for us to help our students develop these skills on these ice-like environments. I'd like to just talk to the two photos there. That we were introduced to a teacher out in Manitoba who put this together in a school, and I think it's absolutely fascinating, the work that takes place to get to that point. And it's not easy to get to that point, let me tell you. When I was a teacher, I remember putting together an ice rink, a skating rink, and it's a lot of work. But now to add all the lines and everything, but
so impressive.
Could you imagine how students are provided with opportunities in that environment from the exceptional effort on behalf of a teacher and a teacher group and parent group to put something like that together? Now, when you're thinking of safety, of course, we need to teach these safety issues around traveling on ice, but you can see the skills that can be developed through this opportunity. So what do you need? Well, a sheet of ice, some brooms, perhaps, curling rocks, and we've heard many of our teachers coming up with ideas around using milk jugs, frozen milk jugs, freezing the water, coloring them, and putting them down along the ice. But what about maybe joining up with a curling club that might have some old rocks that they could share with the school? So here's an awesome opportunity to bring curling into your program. But again, I know some of you are looking at it going, imagine the amount of work. And yeah, I understand it's a lot of work, but imagine the learning that can take place and the opportunities around offering breadth and variety in that location. So to summarize our presentation today, we would just like to go over a couple of points as we finish off our discussion. So the implications of our research findings to date. So we have to find some ways to help share effective strategies for PhD teachers to embrace the teaching of AEAs and to understand the importance of AEAs in the PhD curricula. It exists in the majority of our who's here today in our curricula. How can we get to that point of saying this is an important part of our student learning? We found that dedicated professional development regarding AEA, so we found professional development activities such as maybe today's discussion is one of the only teacher characteristics that we found significantly associated with increased teacher embracement. So interestingly, it's that professional development that's aimed at teaching AEAs, which I find important for us to consider. So those of you that are doing some tremendous things, offering tremendous opportunities, such as the photos we've shared in this presentation, we hope that you will come out and to these types of presentations and these conferences and share some of these ideas, because we all can learn from each other. We found that cost is the greatest perceived barrier to embracing AEAs, and of course we talked about this, but not all AEAs are associated to high costs, and I thought, Nathan, you made that point very explicit here today. that it doesn't need to be that high cost that's always a barrier. Time may actually be the most difficult barrier to overcome, and leadership support is vital. And I know that there are some individuals today that are in a leadership position, and we encourage our leaders, our school leaders, to consider the impact that AEAs can have on our students' learning.
Yeah, and just those leaders, Brent, I mean, they're the ones who have, you know, a lot of the ability to make time.
Absolutely. It's the time that is provided. It's the time that school leaders provide and honor and value the fact that maybe you're out watering an ice rink before school, that you're out painting with your parent group. I know that there are teachers that I've taught with in the past who are here today listening to this, and remember the work it took in putting some of those alternate environments together. It's a lot of work, and I think it's important for us to consider this discussion goes beyond just the teachers. It goes into the leadership.
Yeah, that leadership support is so valuable. And even, like, you know, extending classes or finding ways to, you know, work the schedule so that teachers can do activities that take some more time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brooke. Thanks, Brooke. And finally, to finish off here, if teachers embrace alternate environments, the teaching of alternate environment activities, and we can find ways to reduce the perceived barriers. Perceived barriers don't have to necessarily be barriers. They are perceived in our minds. Alternate environment activities have the potential to provide extremely beneficial educational outcomes. And that said, there may never have been a more appropriate time for increasing the teacher embracement of AEAs in our PE programs in our schools today. And we certainly hope that we've provided or shed some light on the importance of AEAs and some of the thought-provoking questions that you have raised and will raise, and hopefully will email us to consider, will only lead to, in my mind, more quality physical and health education programming.
Yeah, so thanks, Brent, and thank you everybody for listening in. We will be sharing this, and I know we've gone over a little bit on time, but I'll throw it back to Faye for some questions. And we do really appreciate you listening in and providing your info on the surveys today and just engaging. So thank you everybody, and thank you, Brent, obviously. And yeah, you can follow us, ask us questions at any point. There we are on Twitter. But yeah, let's throw it back to Faye here.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Brent and Nathan. And we're now going to begin answering some of the questions submitted during today's presentation. And we've received many good questions, and I think we'll only try to answer a couple of them. And if we're not able to answer your questions, feel free to contact Nathan and Brent. We have left their email addresses in the chat line, but also they're easily to be found on social media. So our first question, it's from Grant, and Grant is asking, would you be able to share how you define AEAs? So like the definition.
Sure, I can do that. I think we did that at the beginning there, and that is basically any activity that takes place or outside of the traditional spaces and traditional uses that we see from a gymnasium, field, and playing surfaces or tracks.
And I think it's important, Nathan, you made the point that we're not just considering outdoor education here. It's beyond. It's beyond the term outdoors. So again, providing opportunities to be in those alternative environments away from the gymnasium, as we spoke to, such as skating rinks, swimming pools, curling rinks, all these types of ideas, where really the intent is to provide opportunities for children to develop skills that they will most likely use in adulthood.
Nice. And we have received a lot of comments from Mark, Sylvie, Melissa, Kim. Basically, they were saying these strict restrictions are a factor. Legal department, there's risk liability concerns from the administration and also from the parents. So And especially Kim said, my roadblock is what I am allowed to do due to safety guidelines. My school is near a beautiful trail, but I'm not allowed to take the students. So
Yeah.
I guess the question comes down to, would you be able to provide some practical activities that applies to, the majority of the people or teachers? And on top of that, would you be able to provide some suggestions that factored in social distancing? If we're not able to touch on all of them today, maybe we can include them in the follow-up email, Nathan and Brent.
Sure.
Absolutely. It's a great question, and I mean, we all know this. Going back to who, to everyone on the call today, we've got former school principals I know on the call today. We know teachers who are dealing with these restrictions, and we don't have the one answer, but we do know that there are ways for us to provide alternative environment activities within our school playground. There are ideas around social distancing, such as activities like snowshoeing, opportunities to do orienteering where they are working and you're away from others and you're going to different control points. Certainly, I understand the restrictions that are placed on and the safety and the liability, but this is something that I think we as educators need to continue discussing ways. We have discussed practical strategies and we will continue to, and feel free to email us, but certainly I believe that we have to understand, or we have to help schools understand the importance of these activities on student learning, and how can we work around and work with these restrictions. Certainly becoming flexible in our way of teaching in our fields, great. Let's take some of the ideas that we talked about today, and how can we bring some of those activities onto our field. Think about the curling rink, curling ice on the field. Yeah, safety, we need to think about that, but look, you're taking away the transportation, we're taking away the costs, we're taking away a lot of those barriers, but at the same time, we're providing opportunities through innovative planning, collaborative planning, support from the school leaders, because I'll tell you, most likely you're not having a curling rink on your field without the school leaders understanding that that's going to be happening. And I certainly wouldn't want to be a teacher who does that and shows up the next day and it's sitting on there. It's important for us to consider that we're working with the school leaders, and but certainly to come up with a one answer in terms of the restrictions. I know as a teacher that they exist, and it's important, I think, to really have the school community buy into the importance of this and then work from there. And from my experience as a teacher who went to ski hills, went to skating rinks, went to swimming pools, it really was that joint effort. And I certainly wish upon all of you that you have that experience of having a school leader as effective as ones that I've been fortunate to work with.
Yeah, and it's actually sad to hear that comment that you're not allowed to use a trail. That seems to me, as far as risk goes, trails should be relatively low risk, and I would love to know the justification for that. But I think that's something too with alternative environments, is that we need to advocate for these activities and the importance of these activities, not just within our school, but beyond, to get to people to understand that, there is no more risk walking a trail, in my opinion, than doing lots of the activities that we can do on site. Sure, yes, there's risk of going off site. There's always risk to going off site, but I just think that that's a really short-minded way of viewing it, and that's my opinion. I'm sure there's some administrators out there who would argue with me about that, but I think we need to advocate for that as phys ed teachers, because it's so valuable for the students. How will they ever get comfortable in those spaces if they can't do it in a controlled environment with their peers under the leadership of a teacher and maybe other volunteer adults that are there to make sure that that they're looked after and safe? So yeah, I think that's something that we really have to pay attention to moving forward as a community.
And I agree with you, Nathan, and the word advocate is very important. I think we need to consider our opportunities to share the importance of this topic area amongst our colleagues, amongst our schools, amongst our school districts. And and we need to continue to advocate for it because we know the importance of it. We all collectively know the importance of it, and we need to make sure that we can continue that. And again, that might not happen tomorrow, but if we continue exploring and advocating, I think that this is something we just need to spend our time doing.
Awesome. So regarding the advocacy piece, I think a lot of people agree with you. And here, Kristen said, I agree that admin support is a big factor when looking at these promoting AEAs. So what are some keys to include when having these discussions with admin? And before you answer this, I think Eugene shared a really good point. So he said, we were successful advocating for off-school grounds permission, or school now sends a blanket permission form at the beginning of the school year to allow teachers to take students to spaces within walking distance. It saves times and organizational lead up each time we want to take kids off school property. So that's awesome. And yeah, so I don't know if you want to add anything on top of that suggestion.
From what I understand in the first question is what are some strategies to include in a discussion? And right off the top, this is part of the curriculum. This is in our curricula in terms of developing our students' fundamental movement skills, developing opportunities to engage in meaningful physical activities. This is part of the curriculum. And when you look at your curriculum and you look at the definitions and you see these ideas as to what we're to teach, well, what we've talked about today is that. And so how are we going to engage our students in those activities if we're not able to do so? So I think I would start there and then expand it upon the importance of the literacy, physical literacy, the importance of fundamental movement skill development, the fundamental opportunities to develop lifelong skills that we want our children to develop so that they can use in adulthood. And having that discussion and going back and forth and thinking about the risks that might take place. And there are risks, we know that, but we do want to make sure that we're always containing our momentum towards safety in an injury prevention. However, the opportunities must be there. And to have the discussion, I would begin with that curricular tie.
Yep, I agree, Brent. Well answered. Nothing to add.
Awesome. So I believe here Norma also contributed to the point. So Norma said, invite the administrator into the planning and inviting the administrator with you on an experience. So these experiences build comfort in the community, and the neighbors learn about the students, and the student and the school become. The neighbors learn about the students and the school because we are out in the community. So
and that's my Norma.
That's a great point.
Great point, yeah. Norma. And I'd like to say that when I was a school teacher, I can recall some just absolute phenomenal alternative environment activities that I had our students engage in, and I can still see today our school leader out there with us. And to me, that's exceptional leadership when you're seeing that. So great point.
And Nikki said, in elementary, when classes are short, it is important to get classroom teachers on board too. For example, walk this class to the community pool, allow an extra 10 minutes before class to get skates on, etc. So adding to that point, we have some questions. So Sibel is asking how to get other people on board. What if other people do not want to join in, and how do we help them to see the need?
I think that's a great question. I think, one of the things for me when it comes to getting, the other teachers in your school, especially at the elementary level, on board is they need to see it. I think seeing it is way better than actually trying to explain what you're going to do. And yes, that becomes hard. How do you show somebody if they're not supportive to begin with? But maybe try to get a videotape of you doing an alternative environment activity with the kids and the enjoyment, or invite the other teachers, start off simple, invite, you know, one of the other teachers to participate in something that's alternative environment, but on school property. So, you know, something that they could maybe have a cross-curricular connection with. And we talked about something like orienteering. You could easily have cross-curricular connections with things like mathematics. But if you invite another teacher to take part and to experience it and say, hey, I'll do the work, I'll put this together, you just got to be there and help out, and maybe our classes can do it together. They do it once and they see the response to this, I guarantee that their eyes are going to start to open up and their minds are going to start to open up to, hey, maybe there's some, you know, potential here. And I do think, you know, lots of times too with other teachers, it's about saying, you know, I don't mind doing some of the work, right? I'll do the work, the lion's share of the work to make this happen. You've just got to support me as far as, you know, providing some eyes to help watch the students while we're doing these activities, or support me by, you know, sharing class time a little bit.
Yeah, well stated. I also think, Sibel, that one of the things that seems to work, and Nathan talks about seeing, is that, yeah, really that experience, having some experience in these ideas, because, and you know, I think based on experience of my own, being around schools and staff, one of the things I found interesting was there's not a lot of experience in some of these activities from other classroom teachers. So providing these ideas to become involved in them, absolutely, Nathan, great statement. We need to help them get involved, but at the same time, also think about some of those barriers that are perceived, that teachers perceive to be barriers. So organizational time, you know, it's fairly quick to set this up. Come and watch me set it up, and yes, you know what, the benefits that exist because of this. So really, it's that experience and seeing it. I think that's important, and that's a good starting place, is getting involved. And one of the things that I really think is works well is team teaching. You know, a couple of groups together engaged in some of these activities, hence a couple of or more teachers together then. Thank you for the question.
Great question.
So I know we're way over time, but there are just so many good questions. So let's just do 2 more and then we'll wrap it up. So next question, I do really enjoy this question. So it's from Demi, and the question is, so can you please speak to accommodations for students with disability when facilitating these activities?
Terrific question. Again, I'll start off on this, Brent, and then I think you can really wrap this one up effectively. But for me, I think the first thing here that you have to remember is it's going to be dependent on the type of activity to begin with. Like any phys ed, you got to figure out what your activity is. And so if we're going to a space with, you know, let's say that's snow or ice, or if we're going to a space where we're going into a pool, that's going to influence it. And then obviously you have to know what the what special need maybe that you're dealing with for your students. And so I think, you know, it's really hard to answer that question specifically, because I think those 2 things are your starting points for it. But as far as general ideas, Brent, you want to take a stab at that part? Or you want me to?
Yes, I mean, it's about finding those opportunities for all of our students. It's important for all of our students to be included, and sometimes it takes a little bit of more supports than not to do so. I do know that in some of the situations that I've been in as a school teacher, there are some wonderful opportunities for students with certain types of diverse learning needs that are able to participate in activities with these types of support. So really, it's about working with your resources, your local resources, to provide them, such as if you're heading in the swimming pool, what are some of the opportunities for supports in the pool? You know, there's lots of these types of pieces of equipment we can include in our gymnasium to promote inclusivity, which is absolutely essential in our programming. So there's not obviously a one answer fits all, Nathan, as you said, but certainly there's a necessity in finding and searching for ways. And this again is an ongoing discussion, I think, in our community of PHE teachers to be able to share. And certainly there's lots of literature out there on what teachers are doing successfully to help develop those inclusive learning environments. But there is a need for us to explore for ways to teach all students. And Nathan, you hit it perfectly in saying, first and foremost, what is the diverse learning need that we're working with, and then going from there.
Perfect. And the last question I think is about equipment. So a lot of people are kind of concerned that with the current situation, if we're sharing equipment, what are the considerations? And if we're not, like, if we completely get over the COVID-19 pandemic one day, do you have any experience for schools to share equipment? And do you have any experience or suggestions about how that can be done?
Absolutely, I can speak to a couple of opportunities that I shared. So in Edmonton, I taught in a city center school for years, and we had an opportunity to have skates brought to our school, donated to our school through a grant program that we were able to get. And let me tell you, the skate room was phenomenal. The opportunity for the students to use the skates and get out there and to see students skate for the very first time at a junior high level was just awesome, which wouldn't have happened had we not had those donated skates to our schools. So there are grants out there that I would explore in getting some of this equipment. Nathan, you also make a good point in our paper where you mentioned the fact that we can find ways at school districts, which I think a lot of school districts and schools do a great job sharing equipment. So sharing snowshoes, sharing these inline skates, these types of skates for your small wheels projects. There's lots of ways where we could collaborate throughout the schools and the school districts, and I think that's a good way to start, good place to start. When you're dealing with equipment, because let's be honest, cost is an issue when we think about what equipment costs, but there are ways to get around it, and again, just based on some experience, there are some opportunities to get some donations, but also that sharing.
Yeah, and I mean, here in Manitoba, we are incredibly fortunate to have divisional phys ed supervisors, and they are a wonderful resource for connecting schools within a division. But I think, you know, if you don't have that, or if you do have someone like that, you know, making those connections with teachers at other schools, and lots of times that's going to happen through coaching. I can't imagine there are many teachers on this call today who don't have a phys ed colleague at another school that they know that's in their division or close by, and just talk to them and say, hey, you know, have you ever thought about doing this? And they might say, yeah, you know what, but it's way too expensive. And you go, well, what if we both did it and we looked into sharing? And again, that's when you're going to have to bring the admin in and maybe have a meeting to talk about it. But it starts off by just putting ideas out there and having relationships and using those relationships, building relationships with the other schools. As far as keeping the equipment safe right now during COVID-19, yeah, that's tough. And I think that's one thing with the alternative environment activities that I mentioned earlier, is that lots of them are kind of individually based. So it's only one person per piece of equipment. And you can keep it that way for things like, say, example, snowshoeing, or, you know, we've got activities that don't require any equipment, like hiking, and even something like tobogganing or sledding. If you're building a snow fort, again, there's minimal equipment for a lot of those things. So pick things that don't have much equipment to begin with. But if you do need to use equipment, try right now, I would say, to use activities that don't require sharing equipment. And really, for alternative environments, you're pretty good on a lot of them. The only activities that I can think of that would be very problematic, rock climbing would be a tough one right now. If you want to go to an indoor rock climbing facility, I don't even know if those are open in many places across the country right now. My bet is no, because of everybody touching the holds and the same holds. But most other activities, I don't see too much problem with equipment. I think we can find ways to ensure that you know, each individual has their own equipment. If you look at something like orienteering, yeah, if you're working in groups or maps, it becomes a little bit complicated. But there's the majority of activities that I think of when I think of AEAs, that the equipment is easy to separate. It's just the cost or the management of having that equipment. And I think Brent did a really nice job of touching on, you know, ways to address that.
And I understand that we're living in a different world right now with COVID-19.
Yeah.
And I recently just got a couple pieces of information from people online here that there are schools that find ways to purchase equipment. Maybe 3 or 4 schools purchase the equipment together and then book the times of when they're going to use them. But at the same time, we understand that through this COVID-19 time, that sharing equipment is something that we need to pay attention to. So certainly, when I'm speaking to that, I'm speaking to what we would call normal times, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I think that's a wrap. Nathan, Brand, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, we just want to say sorry for going so long, but thank you to THE for giving us this opportunity, and our colleagues who helped us out with it, because it has been a wonderful experience today, and the number of people who tuned in was just fantastic to see. So I think there's lots of interest out there in AEAs, and this goes to show that it's something that we all need to consider moving forward. Thoughts, Brent?
Yeah, I want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy days. I know everyone's busy here, especially the teachers who are teaching and getting back to their daily routines. But I would like to say that thank you for paying attention to the AEAs and the importance of them. And certainly, I hope to talk more with you through email or Twitter or whatever, and share some thoughts. But please understand the importance of sharing those positive experiences that you're seeing in your schools around the implementation of AEAs, so that we can share them across our PHE Canada community of educators. And thank you to PHE Canada for providing us an opportunity today to speak. So thank you for this opportunity.
Awesome.